Okay, good morning. Basar b'chalav Yoreh Sadi Dalid Seif Zayin. Okay. Basar oteach. So you have a hot piece of meat. I'll just give you a foreshadowing to the Ramah. Let's assume we're talking about a kli rishon. Basar oteach. Shechatchu b'sakin cholevet. You pull out your milchik knife from the drawer. Kola chaticha asura. So now, since the basar, it's a hot piece of meat, it's a kli rishon, and you got soleted bo, and you cut it by mistake with a milchik knife, the entire piece of meat, we call it treif. You can't eat it. Basar b'chalav. Im ein, however, it depends. Let's keep reading. Im ein bashishim keneged makom hasakin shechatach habasar. Okay, so it just depends. It has to be batal b'shishim, otherwise we assume the worst. It goes all the way through, and everything has to be thrown out. And how do you calculate your shishim? So you go by the portion of the knife that was cut through the meat. So let's say you only use 2 inches long of the knife. So you only calculate the thickness of those 2 inches. The square, the area, the volume of the up and down, because it cut all the way through. So you use the volume of that portion of the knife, the portion that was used for cutting. So as long as you paid attention and you knew what portion of the knife was used, it just has to be enough meat that shishim keneged that portion of the knife. If you didn't pay attention and you're not sure how much was used, so then it's based on what's normally used. I'm not sure how much you can judge it by looking at the knife itself, perhaps where it's dirty. The shachs is a little bit two opposite things. In the beginning, when we had the spoon, half in, half out, and you're not sure how much of the spoon, so we said it's only the spoon that goes in. So he says basically there, you only have to assume that you put in the ladle, the main part of the spoon, and the rest was out, so that's how you decide. I would agree, but often I might just put the whole spoon inside the soup. So I would probably go by as far, the height of the liquid and how far the spoon goes in. Here, he says, since it's normal to use the entire knife, therefore you have to be considered if you're not sure. We're saying if you know, then you know. But if you're not sure, then you have to go by the entire knife, except for the handle. So that's also could very well be true, but it could also be stama in your house. Maybe you're always an inch away from the handle. So I think it's mainly by mitzias, but that's what the shach writes. Okay. All right, and it points out this is similar to the first day that we hold by in the beginning of Tzadi Dalid, where it only goes by the part of the spoon that goes in and not the whole thing, right? We said that. Okay. The Bir Gal just points out, interesting, when it comes to, we learned by Beit HaShchita, we learned that when you cut with the shachti knife or a knife with the Beit HaShchita, so it has a din of roteach, but only by the neck, it only has a din of cham up to a klipa. That's why the halacha there is only kadei klipa. But here is the whole piece of meat. It's a kli rishon and it's hot all the way through. There, the whole animal is not hot, so you can't compare the two. So there, the halacha is kadei klipa. Here, it's kula, right? We're afraid it goes all the way through. Okay, let's keep reading. Aval, im eino ben yomo, if it's not a ben yomo, the knife, for example, is not a ben yomo. Oh, im eni yadua shehu ben yomo, or you don't know if it was used in the past 24 hours. So the halacha is, we know that later on also, stam kelim enu ben yoman. You never have to. You always assume it's not a ben yomo unless you know it was used. Right? You had 2 knives that were used. Let's say you're not sure which one. You go enu ben yomo. Okay, ella kedei klipa. So if you use a milchik knife by mistake in a hot piece of meat, but it's eno ben yomo, so we don't have to worry about the belia going through because it's ta'am lifgam. But there is something you have to worry about, which is kadei, and therefore you have to remove kadei klipa. So it's because of the shamnunit, karush al panav, as the Shach says, but they all say it. Because we assume knives, unless you know otherwise, we assume a knife always has some shamnunit alav, some fat on it, some fat residue, and some fat grease on it. That's the general assumption. Okay. Um, Here, I'll just point out that in general, what happens nowadays, if you find a knife in your drawer, do we have to worry? Um, I'll just raise it as a question, and we'll go from there. If you have a knife in your drawer, do you assume that it's clean or dirty? Is there shamnunit alav or not? So I'm going to point out two opposite things, and then hopefully we'll figure it out or how it applies. When you have in a drawer, so the Darkei Tshuva, and it's quoted by Rabbi First in his Halacha of Laws of Kashrus, Rabbi Forst, that a stam kli in a drawer nowadays we assume is clean and doesn't have shamnunit alav. Okay. However, there's also halacha that when something needs to be cleaned of the shamnunit, the only way to get rid of it is neitza bakarka. We're going to see that. And I'll just jump to the chase a little bit. That whenever we say neitza bakarka, it means you're stabbing it 10 times. And as Tosfos points out in Avodah Zarah, it's in a ground that's lo kashev velo rach, not too hard, not too soft, otherwise it doesn't work. But you stab it in 10 different places, 10 times, and in total 10, each time in a different place, in the dirt, it could be near each other, and then that's what removes the shamnunit. Now, just to point out, that's only, when we say neitza bakarka, that's only to remove the fat on the surface of the knife. Many say it doesn't work out. It doesn't work if it's serrated or it has grooves in the knife, because it can stay in there. I'm not sure about serrated, but certainly if there's grooves, it doesn't work. Okay, so that's a question about serrated. But it doesn't help. Neitza bakarka doesn't help to remove when there's a belia of iser. Anytime you have a belia of iser, basar b'chalav, to remove that got in there from heat, then that doesn't help. It only helps to remove anything that's shamnunit that's on it, but not from heat. Heat doesn't help you. So leaving as he points out, Rabbi Forst and others, leaving your knife inside a pot upside down for 24 hours unfortunately does not accomplish anything. As far as I know, there are I don't know how many, but it's known that definitely some families they do that, but it's not a proper minhag. And it's a famous Rabbeinu Tam in the beginning of Bava Basra where he says minhag is the same letters of Gehenim. So in general, we assume minhag is kovea halacha when there's resources for it, when there's rabbanim masora, etc. But a minhag that has no source, without any and no backing from halachic sources whatsoever, written or at least oral, generally minhag doesn't stand. That would be an incorrect minhag. So depends. He actually writes it is. But I think everyone says it just depends. It can't be too soft. It can't be too fresh and too fluffy. And then it doesn't work. But otherwise, you could use a flower pot for neitza bakarka. Anyways, he quotes a machlokas, and he says it probably should work. But anyways, there is a discussion. For neitza bakarka, if you can use it, use steel wool or a sharpening stone to get rid of it. And many point out that that's fine. He recommends better to do neitza bakarka if you can, because that's what was koveya by Chazal. Okay. Hot water and soap does not take care of. Right. So we have to just figure out when it could be. It's only by a knife. It's an issue. clean pot, we assume is clean in the drawer. We're not worried about shamnunit. The question is, for a knife, I have to see again, when does it help you? If you didn't do Neitza, but you did have a clean knife, when does that help you out? That I'm not 100%, that I'm not sure about. But we'll see, hopefully, when it comes up again, maybe we'll get it more clarified. Okay. Right, because we see that, we always assume, when we read the Shulchan Aruch, stam, we assume it's not clean. But his point is, nowadays in our drawers, we assume it is clean. But you didn't do steel wool sharpener and Neitza v'karka. So, okay, exactly. There's a little nakuda there that's not clear. But okay, but it's just important to hopefully clarity, or if somebody wants to offer. Okay, so let's keep reading. So we said you need, if it's eno ben yomo, all you need to do is kedei klipa because of the shamnunit. Okay, so let's keep reading. The Rama says like this: Haga, v'kol ze bebasar roteach b'kli rishon. Now this is, we're talking about basar, a hot piece of meat that's in a kli rishon. V'az imasakin ben yomo, v'ein shishim bebasar neged asakin akol asar. So the case we're talking about is everything's a kli rishon and everything's a ben yomo, because that's the only time it could be in part. It can make the whole thing aser. V'afasakin tzarich hagala, and the only way to kosher the knife is through hagala. Okay, aval imu kli sheni. But if we're talking about a kli sheni, habasar tzarich klipa, then the piece of meat only needs klipa. V'hasakin neitza b'karka, and the knife only needs neitza b'karka. Because if we're talking about a kli sheni, then it doesn't really impart anything balua to the knife, but you have shamnunit alav, so you have to remove it with neitza b'karka. Yeah, you can have milchak shamnunit. Well, now you cut it into meat, so now it's collect. You have to do neitza to collect it from the shamnunit of the basar.
So the knife was milchik.
Right.
So shamnunit is milchik.
Before you cut the piece of meat, you worried about shamnunit from cheese.
Right.
And now, after you cut the meat, since it was a klisheni or cold or whatever, if everything is cold or it's anyway. So now or eno ben yomo of the knife. So now, when you put it through the meat, the milchak knife is still milchak, and you don't have to kosher it per se, except to remove the shamnunit of the basar that you just cut it with. And the basar itself, you have to do kedei klipa because of shamnunit. That was of the milchak shamnunit on the knife from before. Right. I always have to worry about both. Go both directions. No. Duchta de tzakina is really not an issue. It's mentioned, but it's really not an issue. The only time duchta de tzakina is an issue when it's a davar charif, when you have the two together. Again, it's a whole discussion, but the bottom line is, and we're going to get there a little later, soon, but bottom line, that's generally how it's referred to as. Okay. So now, okay. So if you noticed, you had a piece of meat that went onto another plate, and it was a klisheni. So then the Rama is mekel. However, the Shach and Ashkenazi poskim point out the Rama was mekel by a chunk of piece of meat. But Ashkenazim in general, poskim point out, were machmer for a davar gush. Anytime you have a hot piece of meat that comes off of the flame, it was a kli rishon, and it's still yad soleted bo, even if you take that piece of meat and now you put it onto a plate, so Ashkenazi poskim say it still retains its heat, and it's a davar gush, it's a solid piece. It still retains its status as a kli rishon. So therefore, according to the Shach points out that it's you have to do hagala, on the knife. It wouldn't be okay to do Neitza in this case, because it mamish becomes aser from a kli rishon, and the piece of meat, kadei klipa would for sure not be enough. It's a kli rishon. I think the whole thing is aser. It's either netila or the whole thing. We're talking, unless it's shishim. Right. If it's shishim, then there's no problem with the meat, except for kadei klipa. If it's not batal b'shishim, so I believe we say it goes through the whole thing, and the entire piece of meat is aser, if it's a davar gush. Again, if there's hefsed meruba and other issues like that, perhaps it is what to be somechan. The Ramah and Shulchan Aruch doesn't hold of the davar gush, and generally we do. I know a famous kula by Hilchos Shabbos. Even though we say you have, we hold of, what's it called? Here, I'll just say it out. Putting in some ketchup on a hot piece of steak. So then I think most or many Ashkenazim are makel 100%.
It's not a good example because ketchup is kosher.
Right, but that's why I pointed it out. Why are we makel by Shabbos? Because we do say there's bishul achar bishul b'davar lach. The ketchup is cold, but since you're having two chumras or two issues of a machloket you put together, so in general, many Ashkenazim would say it's mutter lechatchila to put cold ketchup and let it get sizzling hot on a sizzling piece of meat. Stam, I just threw that in there, davar gush.
What about cheese on a hot potato?
So cheese on a hot, if you call that,
Cheese is not kosher.
wait, I'm not sure. Here, ask me afterwards. I'm not sure how that's. Okay, let's keep going. Here, I'm just going to read a line from the Shach towards the end of Lamed Aleph. Towards the end, he writes about the knife. Af she'abasar hu rach. So this is interesting. Even though the meat is soft, it could be very soft, you still have to do Neitza. But if you cut a hard piece of cheese, and even though it's cold, then you still need to do Neitza. So it comes out from here. If a knife could collect fat, that you have to do Neitza if it's a little warm or hard. But if something is cold and soft, then and Rabbi Forrest also points it out, halacha, anything that's cold and soft, you don't have to worry about collecting shamnunit, only when it's warm or hard. So that's comes out a little bit of a kula there. Okay, and then and then you just have to rinse it off, but you don't have to worry about doing neitza. Okay. Neitza is when you need it, when you're worried about shamnunit getting stuck onto the knife, which requires something hard or a little warm. Okay, let's continue. The Ramah says, "V'chen nohagin," and this is the custom. Afilu eina sakin ben yomo yesh liklof habasar me'at mishum shamnunit hasakin. So therefore, even if it's not a ben yomo, anytime you use a knife, from meat to milk or opposite, everything is cold, everything, and nothing's a ben yomo, you still have to remove kedei klipa. Okay. I'm assuming even if it's cold he's talking about, but I did add that. Okay, let's get to chet. Inaf ala tanur pandash gvina. Filu lecha. So what's the case? The pandash is you have a hot piece of meat in the oven. Okay? The first case is it's a hot piece of meat, but it's completely dry. There's no sauce, there's no moisture. It's a completely very dry piece of meat. There's no obvious moisture on it. I'm assuming it could be a drop moist. We're not talking about a burnt piece of meat. but a relatively dry piece of meat. That's how the poskim point. Explain it to make sense. I'll just say the Achronim do grapple a little bit. Why is the first case going to be an issue of Kadei Klipa? We're going to keep reading. Maybe it should be more or less, at least a Natila, or all of it, but let's keep reading. So you have a piece of cheese, and it lands on a hot piece of meat that's in a Kli Rishon, it's in an oven, or it's from the oven. So we're going to see, what do you do when a piece of cheese lands on it? V'chen gevina chama b'ke'arat basar bat yoma. Or if you just have an empty fleshik pot that's yad soledet bo, and you have cheese land on top of it. So in both cases, eino osar ela kedei klipa. The problem, it only becomes asar kedei klipa. So normally we're used to kulo or natila, and now let's suffice it to say that in the case with the hot piece of meat, that's usually going to be the halacha, that it's asar kedei natila or kulo. That's usually going to be the issue. It depends if also depends if it's moist or not and what the issue is. But we'll see more about this later on when things touch each other by tarovis. By the kli, it's easy to understand. It's only kedei. It's much easier to understand. It's only kedei klipa, and right. Okay. Now the second case of hot cheese, it could be cold cheese in a hot pot or hot cheese. I mean, because it's tata gavar, it makes more sense that it's the gvina chama is hot landing on a ke'ara, but it could be either way, hot or cold. So what's the halacha? You do kedei klipa. And one of the explanations for it, why it doesn't go deeper, is because we're assuming cheese is not something that digs deep into the meat. It stays pretty much on the surface.
This is an empty pot, right?
Well, the first case is it lands on a piece of meat or food that's fleshik, and the second case it's on a fleshik pot, and that's okay. So, and well, that's what I think it's a case from this, one of the Rishonim is where the case comes from. Where does it say? Anyway, that's what the Mefarshim explain. And anyway, so that's, bottom line, that's the halacha. And in this specific case, what else do we want to say about it? You're not having a knife cut all the way through. That we had that case, that would be a bigger problem. Then it could be kulo. Anyways, it's just on the surface level, and it's an item and it's all dry, and it doesn't go through. So in this case, he says kedei klipa is enough, but at the end, the shach does end up with the words umikol makom tzarech iyun. It's a little bit of a difficult scenario. Usually, we would say it's aser kedei natila or kulo.
Doesn't agree with this halacha?
Not sort of. It's not sure. Everyone tries to explain it and is maybe not 100% comfortable. I don't know. But and then he points out though, but the gavina itself that touches the hot piece of meat based on tata gavar, it's a natila. It goes up an natila. It's not wet. So the cheese you have to remove an natila, but the piece of meat you only have to do kedei klipa. All right.
Even though cheese is usually called fat,
Yeah.
that's not considered a pot there.
Like I said, let's continue to Tet, and we'll finish. We'll finish with Tet. Bishlu dvash b'machavat shel basar bat yoma. Again, this is another case of not barnat, and really the ikr sugi of not barnat is tzadi hay, which I guess we're not going to start today. But what happens over here? You're cooking honey in a fleshik b'machavat shel basar bat yoma. It's a fresh, hot. Right, and all this will make a bit more sense after you read tzadi hay. So you have a fleshik pot, ben yomo. It was used within 24 hours. It was hot. Now you're heating up honey in it. Very cool, cham, and you pour it while it's still hot. B'ke'ara shel chalav bat yoma. And now you put it into a milchik pot that was used within 24 hours. It's mutter. Mishum dehave notein tam bar, notein tam dehetera. So it's 100% mutter lechatchila to pour the honey from one pot to another, because everything, there was never any isser. There was never any bliya of isser. It was, before it was milchiks, and that was separate, and then later there's fleishiks, which is separate. The milk and meat never met. Now this is the
Lashon Lachab is not that it's mutter l'chatchila. The Lashon is in Shiriyana.
Rishul Devash Machavat. Okay.
And Herikrum.
Okay, so we're going to save this discussion for next year, when we're going to hopefully hopefully we'll finish, but we'll do most of the whole sugya of not bernat to hetera, and we're going to see it's a machlokas if it's lechatchila or bediyevid according to the Shulchan Aruch. We're going to see according to the Ramah, this halacha is only bediyevid. Lechatchila, it's aser to pour from one to another, one pot to another pot, and the Shach just quotes the Ri, who says why is this mutter? Because it's a case of noting ta'am lifgam. So because the shamnunit is not a plus to your honey. Putting shamnunit in your honey is not something you want. It's a ta'am lifgam. So therefore, even according to the Ramah and all opinions, even according to the Shulchan Aruch, it's mutter lechatchila to pour from one to another. That's their opinion based on the Ri. If there's a ta'am lifgam, it's mutter lechatchila. If there's no ta'am lifgam, then it's a machloket if it's mutter lechatchila or only bediyevid, because it's notein ta'am. It's not barnat the hetera. So then it's a machlokas if it's only bediyevid mutter or lechatchila mutter. We're going to discuss that the next day. But if it be notein ta'am lifgam, it'd be mutter.